Okay, I think we'll get started. Hello, I am Max Folkman.
And I'm Nick Folkman.
And we're here today to present Keeping the Trains on Time, Building and Maintaining Running Momentum. Okay, I'm a senior writer at Riot Games. I did survive the layoffs this week, and I'm currently on, thank you. Currently I work on League of Legends.
And I'm a senior writer at Insomniac Games.
And here are some of the projects we've worked on in the past, mostly as writers, but sometimes as narrative designers.
So like our title says, this talk is about one of the things that we always struggle with in some way, how to start writing and how to keep that momentum going, even when everything starts blowing up, for both first drafts and any subsequent drafts we do. We're going to go over what's worked for us over the years, along with some examples from our careers. And hopefully there's at least one thing here that's useful for all of you. And we want to show that with the strategies and techniques we use, and from having worked on like a bunch of games, different sizes, some very big, like what we're doing is not anything crazy and overall is pretty easy to understand and not complicated. So part one, what to do before you start writing that isn't just procrastinating.
It is extremely important to maintain a full and consistent sleep schedule. I'm not joking about this. Good sleep improves your brain performance, mood, and health. The information you take in during the day is transformed from a fragile state into a more durable state, which can bring about those aha moments. And by good sleep, I mean 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep. Not doing that raises your risk of disease and disorders. I'll say that the last time I got into a bad crunch cycle, I didn't notice how it was affecting my sleep cycle until I realized that I hadn't dreamed in months. That, and normally I will have a couple of ideas for whatever I'm working on during that liminal period between going to bed and actually falling asleep. But because my schedule was so out of whack, I would basically hit the bed and pass out until the alarm woke me. The point of this is to say that making games is hard enough. Get the sleep in, please. So next thing I want to talk about is breaking down your problem. Starting from zero and completing that first deliverable is always hard, but as all of us hardcore gamers know, we love seeing the numbers go up. So I break everything down into smaller tasks, which I know sounds obvious, but sometimes you need to be reminded, or at least I do, and go as granular as you need. I usually try to break them down into ones that can be done that week, in a day, or in a 90 or so minute writing sprint in between my meetings. The way I think about it is, it's like the equivalent of starting with kindling for your creative fire instead of going straight for the big logs. I have to build up to the big fire. So as an example, let's talk about how I broke down my Winter Bless tasks from last year. As I said, I work on League of Legends, and when we create new skins for our champions, we are essentially creating new alternate universes for them to inhabit. Winter Blessed is inspired by Eastern European folklore, and I helped create it in 2022. So this was a chance to revisit it. I'm just going to talk about my two biggest player-facing deliverables, which were to create a VO script for Senna, who was our big skin release for the drop, as well as write skin descriptions for her and the other champions who were a part of it, which were 8 total. So when I started breaking down my tasks, I knew I needed to reread what I did for Winter Blessed 2022. I have a friend with a medieval history degree, so I wanted to meet with them to get some inspiration. Then I'd start outlining, and while I did that, I would also talk with Riot's internal diversity teams to make sure that Senna is being authentically represented, as well as talk with the artists working on Winter Blessed to see what they were passionate about. Then I would format the script, but not start writing, because that beats its own task. I would write the log line for each champion, which are one-sentence blurbs about who each character is in this world. Those would be sent to my editor, so they could get approved. And then I'd start writing my first draft, which would then later be sent to my editor, and I would revise as needed. I need to scroll down on my notes, and there's no mouse up here. Thank you. The skin descriptions are pretty small tasks since they're basically a paragraph each, so I can usually knock those out pretty quickly, and I always leave some threatening question marks for emergent work that will undoubtedly come up. The point of all this is that when you look at this huge list of smaller, more manageable tasks, it makes the huge deliverable less daunting and easier to start checking them all off.
Wait, no, it's you.
Oh. Okay, so after I've broken them down, I need to prioritize them. especially when you're working on multiple things at once. Yeah. For me, the top priority will always go to anything that is currently blocking someone. If I'm not, then I'll look at the due dates and go with whatever's the soonest. And if they're all pretty far out, then it's whatever I'm in the mood for. Sometimes I want to do really short and fast stuff, and other times I am ready to pound my head against the wall or on something really big for a bit. Pretty simple.
And on a similarly simple note, it's not required that you be excited about what you're working on before you start writing, but let's take the easy stuff where we can, especially because players can absolutely tell when the writers and developers too are excited about what they're making. So if you're not already excited, can you find a character you want to write, a beat or scene you're aiming for, or an emotion you're trying to hit? Beyond that, is there art you can look at of what you're working on, music from the game that you can listen to, a team presentation you can watch, other scripts from the game, even a playlist you or someone else made for this for inspiration? But let's say you've gone through all of that and there's still nothing on this project getting you fired up, because it happens. My break glass in case of emergency is to just read or watch something that is an example of amazing writing. I even have a YouTube playlist of my favorite dialogue scenes that I keep going back to when I really want to get excited. One of the ones I've watched a lot recently is the scene from the movie Steve Jobs, where Jeff Daniels and Michael Fassbender are verbally fighting over computer sales and board meetings, which sounds stupid, but it's incredible. But part two, you're all ready, you're prepped, you've got the right mindset, and God willing, you're excited. How do you actually start writing?
Okay. My whole strategy around my writing momentum is based around tricking my brain, because if brains are like trains, it takes a lot of effort to get them going. And in my case, sometimes knowing how hard it'll be to get going will dissuade me from even starting. My brain loves coming up with reasons why I shouldn't write. It's how I get most of my non-writing work done, like cleaning up my place. I'll dive into this more in a minute, but perfectionism can also be just as big of a factor before you start something as when you're deep into the actual writing. Is the idea perfect? Is the outline perfect? Is this line perfect? All of that can slow you down. For all those reasons, we need to talk about writer's block and how it does not exist. Writer's block is just a refusal to write something that's bad, which sounds bad, like the thing we shouldn't be doing, but bad is okay, because we will revise it later, unless you don't have time for any revisions, in which case you need to speak with a producer or project manager, because that schedule is the thing that's really bad. The most important thing is to get anything out so that we can start building up that momentum. And are you saying you can't write anything at all? You're lying, but maybe you're thinking, well, there's bad, but my bad is worse. Like how everyone says they're bad at karaoke, and then you hear them, and they have the voice of angels while you're trash. It doesn't matter. Nothing is too bad, which leads us to the garbage draft, or my first draft. Some of you might already use garbage drafts, but for those that don't, in the past, one of my problems was even after outlining for a while, my first draft took forever because I was fine-tuning every little thing, enough that by the time I finished, I'd either be super tired or lose some of the spark that I'd started with. For me, the point of doing a garbage draft is to free myself from writing something good. You want to look at your piece and be able to say, yeah, it should be something like that, or definitely not that. It's more about getting a sense of the shape and less about the details. Along those lines, sometimes I'll use cliches. You might be thinking, but they're so overused. And to use the parlance of kids today, basic, which is true. But you know what's also true about cliches? They're clear. One of my biggest problems when I'm working on my first drafts is just getting meaning out of my head and onto the page. And sometimes the simplest way to get your point across at the start is using a cliche or two. I can always revise it later and find a non-cliched way of saying the same thing. Next, I will have already had some of the draft filled in for my outlining stage. I know I skipped my outlining process, but I write down everything I come up with when I'm outlining, whether it's dialogue, turns of phrase, or like an idea for how to structure a bio. And then part of the fun when I move on from outlining is going through my, can you scroll down please? Thank you. Going through my slightly messy notes and slotting stuff into the script or Excel sheet. Even if it is actually garbage writing, it's still better than nothing. Lastly, this is not the draft I will be showing anyone. I'm just trying to get a sense of the whole, and the next draft is where I'm really working on the lines and will be showing once it's done. Okay, so now I'm going to be vulnerable and show some garbage draft examples from my dialogue. We will look at the first moves from Winter Blessed Diana, which I wrote in 2022. They're the lines that you hear at the start of a match. And you'll see that the first line, I'm just trying to establish the character, and that was something that was in my head that I've been thinking about, that I've just been thinking about. The next one was me tweaking a line from the movie Kingdom of Heaven. It's the same thing as cliches, where if they're helping, you get across an idea, put them down. Next, I am stealing from Cormac McCarthy. Wait, not that one. The second line ended up being completely rewritten into something else, and this one I basically kept the idea of balance and scales. And then the last three were me taking too long to write something, so I just wanted to come up with some different topics for the lines. And then here's stuff from Imperium Veris, which is just a bunch of screaming all caps gestures at ideas, but at least they're giving me a direction to go when I look over it again. I go really wide and basic when I don't know what I'm doing, and just write all caps anything, just because it's better than starting with anything that's blank, and it makes you think that I'm doing more work than I actually am. So I'll move on before I get too embarrassed. Okay, so I'm sure you have heard of the quote, "We aim above the mark to hit the mark," which comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's a very Western outlook, but I think it's the wrong way to think about your work. This might be controversial, but my belief is that you should shoot for a B. Why? Because a B is attainable, and an A is luck. An A is perfection, which is beyond your control and depends on good timing and the whims of the gods. Perfectionism is dangerous. It's unsustainable, and you risk losing the forest for the trees when you fixate on one part of your work. You can also burn yourself out when you don't know when to move on, which will cost you and the team more in the long run. There's a great quote about perfectionism from Gary Gagowski, who is a furniture maker. "The most important thing I need is forgiveness. I have to be able to let myself make mistakes. I want to avoid mistakes, but when they occur, as they will, I have to take it easy on myself. Perfectionism kills and strangles me and prevents me from taking any chances, from being curious, from enjoying what accomplishments I have made at the bench. Excellence is my standard now. I work to make not my best piece ever each time. I work to make each piece excellent." This is all to say that ultimately it's better to shoot for that B, go to 80% of what you have in your head, and then reassess it in the context of the whole. Oh, I forgot that. Okay.
Now let's say you're okay with writing something bad, but you're still frozen. Either you don't know where to put the stake down, or you think everything you're writing is worse than bad, and you're just trying to get to at least bad. Stream of consciousness is not a new concept at all for writing, and honestly, I don't know if this is how everyone else does it, but this is how I do it. If I'm frozen on a line of dialogue, I will just write everything that pops into my head and keep writing that one line until there's something in there that sticks. Then I'll move on to the next line, and the next, and the next, etc. And if I'm doing this and I keep writing the same line, it's fine, because then I'll eventually get so frustrated with myself for doing it that I'll usually end up writing something I don't expect. If that line doesn't work, it'll push me into a different direction that eventually will. And the same goes with non-dialogue too. Just let it all flow out, and at least for me, it tends to get out the most obvious and inessential writing from my brain first. And if we're letting that stream flow for a bit, the better stuff, or at least uniquely bad stuff, will come out. So far we're giving you a lot of slack to essentially not be perfect, which is great, but that doesn't mean you always have to be firing from the hip. Some might say this is more prep work, but you're figuring out story and character beats with this, so I count it as writing. And honestly, you can do this before you start writing a draft, during or after, or all three. It's always useful. The idea is that you have a spreadsheet document where the first column is the type of beats in a level or mission. At Insomniac, we typically break them up by the type of gameplay that's happening, so traversal, combat, stealth, experiential, cinematic, etc., such as what you see here. Then the second column is where we fill in what's happening in the story for each of these beats, and each column afterward is for the important characters. I like to go a bit wild and have what the character is doing externally in terms of actions, but also internally with what their mindset is during each beat and why they're doing it. Granted, a lot of the internal stuff probably won't appear in the final game or even in the script itself, but it's helpful for keeping characters consistent, and it can give you ideas for things later on. And then you have another column for general notes in case you're sharing this with other team members, or for yourself, like things you're calling out to pay off later, problems you haven't solved yet, etc. And then you have a final column for any ideas for dialogue you may have. Now, part 3, you've written something that's bad or better. What do you do now? How do you keep going? And how do you keep from slowing down? The thing I'm always doing, no matter what, even if I'm not struggling with whatever I'm writing, is to leave something for tomorrow. Ideally, that means when I'm getting to the end of the day and really jamming on a piece of writing, I'll stop while I still know where I'm going and how to finish it. That way, when I pick things up the next day or later in the week, I don't have to think too much and I can get a running start. And if I do just want to finish writing what I'm working on because I'm so excited about it or whatever, then I'll do that and really rough it out. Emphasis on rough, like basically brainstorming. And since I'm only roughing it out and not even attempting to write a garbage draft, it feels like I'm tricking my brain into not worrying about the quality of anything again. And oftentimes I'm able to outline a scene or drop some piece of dialogue that works really well and would have taken me a while to work out normally. Plus, if you ever have a day where you're stuck in meetings and don't have much, if any, time to write, giving yourself this opening to just jump in, jam out some ideas, or brainstorm some more helps you keep at least a little bit of momentum going. And this is a bit of a side tangent, but trying to engage with your story every day in some way is a big thing for me, because each day we're looking at this stuff, we're never in the same mindset we were in the day before. Even if it's just a little bit different, that can be enough to make you look at a problem or a character or a plot thread differently and unlock all kinds of possibilities for you. If I can afford it, I never want to write something in one day before I have to hand it in. Can you scroll down a little bit? I'm sorry, we have so many notes. I always want at least 2 days because I know I'm going to see stuff on the second day that I didn't on the first, and 99% of the time it leads to a better script. Max will also get into the science of this in a bit. It's like we're leading a pincer movement. Why spend one day attacking a script with one way of thinking when you can attack it with 2 ways, 3 ways, or more? Obviously, we don't want to get ridiculous because it can quickly get into procrastination, but you get the idea. Leaving something for yourself for tomorrow can be very helpful. So this slide was originally titled "Don't Stop," and I was going to use the obvious metaphor of, you gotta be a shark. You can't stop moving or you'll die. Even if you're writing the garbage of garbage, just keep going until you do a draft. And frankly, that is insane and unrealistic. I think for most people, even if we're really focused on writing, we're gonna get distracted by something eventually, or get caught into a meeting or pull into something that we have to devote our time to. It's inevitable, so I think it's more reasonable to think of yourself as a whale. You're gonna go down and do your thing for a bit, and then you're gonna come up for air, and then you're gonna go down again and repeat. Which basically means give yourself set time frames to write, and do your best to make sure you're only doing writing then. So turn off Slack or set yourself to busy at least. Try not to look at anything on the internet if you can help it, even if it's for research. Schedule meetings that only involve yourself, which is especially important if you find yourself in a lot of meetings each week. Actually, scheduling time for yourself to write can help a lot, even if it's just one writing meeting a day. The point is you're trying to give yourself as few outs to procrastinate as you can. And then you're coming up for air. That's when you can do your research, respond to messages and emails, do real meetings, whatever. I should have clicked that earlier. Now, from an actual writing standpoint, being a whale also means that I try to do a full pass before I start revising anything. My natural inclination is to always make sure I have a solid structure before I move forward with anything, but that tends to make me do something like, I'll write a few lines, realize that I'm not feeling too good about the second line, so I go back and revise that, but now the lines around it don't completely connect with this new line, so I gotta go look at them, and then I'm gone. And when I finally get to the end of the scene, I realized that the way I was thinking of the whole thing doesn't totally work, so I gotta change this ending, which means I gotta go change the beginning, and then I'm back to square one and it's taken forever. So it's better to just start writing and don't stop to revise anything until you're done with the scene or beat or whatever it is you're writing. And if you do have things you really want to change that come to mind as you're writing, just make a note of it. You'll pick it up in the next pass. And if you find yourself struggling a bit, you can also jump around to a later part in the scene. That'll happen to me sometimes when I'm working on the beginning of a scene and get an idea about how to close it out that gets me excited. So I'll go write that, and then I know where I'm heading, so I can go back and write towards that. If you want to be extra wild, if you're struggling, you can also jump to writing another scene entirely, because sometimes I'll get grass is greener syndrome, and I'll find myself really wanting to work on anything else, and especially another scene that's wholly different than what I'm working on. So I'll go write as much as I can on that, which makes me excited to go back to the original scene. And it sounds complicated, but better to do that than stare at the blinking cursor for 20 more minutes. Thank you. And I should also say that a lot of this advice is more for early drafts when you're figuring stuff out. Once you hit later drafts, you can afford to be much more surgical because hopefully by that point, you'll be more connected to your story and characters, so it's easier to drop in and out with your writing. So another unsurprising thing that can help us, deadlines. They can help keep us focused, give us something to aim for, and the stress of missing it can be a powerful motivator. But what if that stress isn't enough? Enter guilt. If your boss is already expecting the script, I like to tell another coworker that I'm going to send them it before the deadline so they can review it and tell me it's perfect. And unless you're okay with lying to people and or disappointing them when you eventually say that you're going to send it to them a bit later, it's helpful. I know that can feel dangerous if you're writing one of your first garbage drafts. You don't want anyone, especially this person, to see your filthy, filthy words, but that's just a matter of setting expectations. And if you are worried about that, great, another motivator to keep you going. I said in here I'm half joking, but I'm not joking. I will use every emotion available to keep me writing too. Max is about to dive into feedback with his slides, but if someone gave me feedback that I disagreed with before, sometimes I'll use that to get me to I'll show you how wrong you are kind of place. Spite probably isn't the healthiest motivator, but it does feel good when you subsequently knock it out of the park. There are positive motivators too. You can totally bring happiness in by looking at feedback you got in the past that was positive, even if it was for a different project. Seeing what people liked in the past, what they connected with, that can be energizing and help focus you to bring more of those things out if that's something you're needing. Thank you. It's also nice to be reminded sometimes of, hey, I'm a good writer and I can do this. If certain coworkers and friends knew the power they had over me though, I'd be fine, but I would be much more stressed than I am right now. Part 4, so we're doing it, we're getting things down on the page, we're writing and keeping momentum going, but then the inevitable happens and our tire blows out, or there's a minefield or an act of God and everything crashes. What do we do? And this is stuff where you can't just keep writing, either because you're on a deadline or the problem is something you're not able to revise your way out of for some reason.
It is time to talk about the ultimate momentum killer, feedback. For me, I take all of it without prejudice and sort through it later. Sometimes even a bad note is productive because it makes you think what caused them to say that. It's like you telling your doctor that your elbow hurts and you find out it's because of a pinched nerve in your shoulder. So one person's comment may shed light on other issues. You have to be willing to give every question the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, you can't take everything on board. All of this is to say that feedback is not an obstacle. It could be another flashlight that helps illuminate potholes you may have missed. And I know trains don't have to deal with potholes, but I will go with it. But if you do hit a wall, we do have some advice. Brainstorming, not an unknown concept to people here, I hope, but it is worth bringing up because the classics do work for a reason. In fact, I will give you 3. 1, a lot of the times you'll figure out the issue before you finish talking because the act of describing it out loud forces you to think in a different way. Plus the momentary embarrassment of calling someone over to brainstorm before immediately saying, actually, I just figured it out, go back to where you came from, is very much worth it. 2, if you don't figure out a solution as you're describing the problem and the people you're speaking to start giving you ideas, most likely either one of their ideas will be the solution to your problem, something they say will give you the idea for the solution, or just help you on your way. 3, if you come out of the brainstorm session with no easy answers, you're still coming out of it with a different mindset than what you came in with, and there's a decent chance you'll now be able to figure it out when you get back to writing. And 4, this can sound weird, but brainstorming with others for issues they're dealing with, even if they're totally unrelated to what you're writing, is great too. Max will talk about this in his next few slides, but giving your mind a break to attack another problem can be extraordinarily helpful. You know the idea that it's easier to diagnose someone else's problems than your own. After you do diagnose said problem, that can help shake things loose with your own work. So this transcript is from one of my favorite resources to draw upon, the Raiders of the Lost Ark Story Conference, where George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and the writer Lawrence Kasdan sat down and just talked through the entire movie, trying to figure out from beginning to end. And this is where they figured out kind of the climax of the movie. And if you search for it online, you can find the PDF, and while you're probably not going to get answers to the problems you're facing from reading it, I do think it can be helpful just to see how other people brainstorm, how different personalities play out, how they bounce ideas off each other, and see all the roads they didn't end up taking and wrong moves they made before making the right ones. It's also why I recommend recording brainstorming sessions if you can. It helps a lot with note-taking, and things that may not feel important or like good ideas at the time could become extremely useful later on if and when your game changes. This is probably my favorite part of the deck. So our subconscious is always suggesting things to us, like, what if we flip these two things around or totally rethought the structure? It's very easy for it to get drowned out, though, especially when you're far into your process. So I try to create quiet moments to allow my subconscious to be heard. Who hasn't had the experience of leaving a problem for a period of time and then finding it way less difficult on returning to the problem, or that the solution comes out of the blue when thinking about something else? This actually has a name. It's called the incubation effect. Now, there are two types of mind wandering we engage in. There is deliberate, where we try to exercise some level of control or direction to our thinking, and there's spontaneous, which happens in the brain without us directing it. It's this state which allows us to combine information and ideas in new ways. The incubation effect comes in when you're working on a problem which sets the groundwork for spontaneous ideas to emerge through unconscious associative processes. There was actually a study published in 2019 where the researchers asked professional writers and physicists to keep a diary for 2 weeks in which they reported their most creative idea for the day, what they were doing when it occurred, and whether it felt like an aha moment. About 20% of the most significant ideas occurred while they were engaging in an activity other than working, or while they were thinking about something unrelated to the creative idea. And those new ideas that were created during those mind-wandering moments were most likely to be associated with overcoming an impasse on a hard problem. But what I don't want you to take from this is to pivot your career to daydreaming 24/7. You scroll down, please. You have to create the problem space. You need to work hard enough on your problem so that when you do take the break, your mind can subconsciously work on it from there. Scroll back up, please. So now, what sort of quiet moments work best to induce this incubation effect? It's probably not a surprise, but you should engage in activities that are not cognitively demanding, like walking, either around your neighborhood or in nature. There has been some research that suggests spending time in nature is conducive to mind wandering because it can evoke a sense of awe and allow your attention to expand to fill the space. You can also take a bath or shower. This is why you'll often have new ideas when you shower. You don't have a lot to do, you can't see much, and there's white noise. Your brain is thinking in a more chaotic fashion, your executive processes diminish, and associative processes amp up, which lead to ideas bouncing around and different thoughts are allowed to collide and connect. Also, gardening can do it too. The thing to remember is you should do this without listening to music or podcasts because they will distract you. You need to become relaxed enough mentally in order to not try to be productive or reach some goal. Or to put it another way, it's when you don't feel guilty about letting your mind wander that you're able to reach new places. So hopefully you found something useful in this presentation, and if something doesn't match with your workflow, don't worry about it. Remember, it's only video games, but if you do this and are able to build up your momentum to top speed, the clouds will part, you will feel the warm love of your family and friends, traffic will make way for you, promotions and job offers will flood your email, and God will descend from the heavens and say to you, now do it again. Except this time, you'll be like this guy. Look how cool he is, just doing everything at once. So thank you, and if you're interested in listening to us more, we host a podcast called Script Lock where we interview folks about storytelling in video games. You can find our socials at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, there's LinkedIn too. But thank you. I don't know if we have time. Is there Q&A time or no?
A couple of questions.
We can do questions if anyone has any questions. Yes.
So my question is about the brainstorming and feedback part, because how do you manage not everyone taking part in that, knowing all context? Is that actually a good thing that they might not have time to read through all the documents, or do you usually do these within the writer group?
That's your section.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Sorry. So basically, do you think it's a good thing to get feedback from people who might not know every single part of your writing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, because it's like, you don't always have to take their feedback. I'd rather hear from everyone else. And Insomniac, the studio culture is really like everyone is a storyteller, even outside of the story department. So we like to hear from everyone, even though that feedback can get overwhelming. And sometimes it's like, honestly, I don't want to hear what this person says, but I want to hear, they'll be wrong, but there's something in there that might, even if what they're saying is not what they're actually diagnosing, it is useful. And if multiple people are saying it too, I want to hear that no matter what. It's just like a matter of sifting through everything. So yeah, the answer is yes, no matter what. Like, it can be a lot of work, but it's more useful than not having it.
And I think when you have people who are working on the game versus people who are like maybe are a different part of the company who are no exposure to what you're working on, the people who are working on the game are used to it in a certain sense, where the people who aren't are able to see things more objectively or just like catch things that you just haven't thought about for a long time or just think is okay. So it's always good, I think, to have people who aren't tied to what you're doing give feedback on it.
Hi guys, I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on kind of how your career paths have gone so far, like how you kind of got where you are now, basically.
Like, it's a lot of, I guess it's being in the right place at the right time, just like being open to opportunities, also really not being an asshole. Like, that is really so important of just, we would go to conferences and meet people. Like, there was a festival in Los Angeles called IndieCade that's still going. That's just a small independent festival. There was a guy giving a talk there. We were like, this is a cool talk. He seems really nice. Became friends. 2 years later, he was directing a game at Double Fine, and he knew we were writers. It's like, hey, we need writers. You want to do a writing test? And then we did the writing test and got the job there. And then that led to meeting people, going to more jobs. It was hard because we were freelancing for a long time, and freelancing as a writer back then especially was hard. I assume it's much harder now too with the state of the industry. But it's like, Liam talked about it in his talk today. Team culture is so important, and people just want to know when you're joining them, like, I don't have to worry about you. And you can teach so much about what the process is at a company and how you write games, but like, you are spending so much time with these people. If it's not working out and you're writing people the wrong way, it will affect the entire team, let alone the whole project. It's like, that is the biggest thing, I think, of how we've had success.
I will add that I think a lot of it is making sure you are ready for the opportunity when they come to you. And it's really hard making a living as a writer, especially in games. And so we diversified like what we were working on a lot. Like, we worked on comics, we were writing scripts and stuff, and just making sure, like, craft-wise, we were there so like when an opportunity came up, we could be ready for it in a certain way. Whereas like not expecting to like we're only gonna go for one studio and try to only focus on that. Like, we were both rejected from Insomniac multiple times and Riot multiple times. Everywhere we've worked at, I think we've been rejected from before. But just also not being precious about having sway, like flexibility with your career and trying to manufacture your own luck to an extent. But then also, I think, also be comfortable with like not working in games as your day job and be able to take other revenue sources. Because especially right now, I've had people I worked with who were laid off at Riot at the beginning of the year who still haven't found another job. But are just being, it's okay. No one looks down on you for having a job that's outside of the games industry.
I'll say one more thing. If I can say one more thing. Especially as a writer, and when we're hiring people at Insomniac, it's like just having different experiences from everyone else, having unique experiences is really enticing to people, which is great. Just like, even if it's not writing related, like working as like a lumberjack or something that is so crazy. It's like, that's different than everyone else who's just like, I only play video games and I want to write video games and that's it. And I don't absorb anything else. Like, there are lots of people who do that already, and we like people who bring different experiences in, because then it brings different things to the stories we're telling. So if you can do that in some way, like, that will be really helpful to you.
Anyone can learn how to make games. Having a unique voice is harder to learn.
We'll be around too if anyone has more questions.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.